the large format, and then that was the updated one.
Okay. And was it easy to get a deal on it? How did you publish it? Did you?
No, it was impossible to get a deal, and none of the mainstream publishers were interested, and I went to Virgin Books, and they wanted to know why I was writing about punk, which is very interesting. But Johnny just signed with Jungle Books, and they said they would put it out.
And we can get a signed edition here as well, if you're
Which I will
interested.
sign, yes.
Yeah, yeah. And there's some super rare Italian versions out there as well.
Yeah, there was only 500 copies of that printed up.
Yeah, which is a beautiful one with lovely paper as well. So the book is gorgeously written, as we would expect.
Thank
So
you, dear.
published as yourself. So tell me how it came to be, the book. How did you meet and how did it start?
I decided, I was a struggling single mum in Manchester signing on, but I wanted to be a writer. However, I didn't have any experience. I'd just written for a few fanzines, but I had this dream, which was to write a book about Johnny. And as I say, I tried all the mainstream publishers. I sold a lot of records to keep coming up on the coach to London. But then Johnny signed with Jungle, and they said they'd put it out. Is that what you asked me, or have I gone on a repeat out of nervousness?
No, you're fine. It was more about you said about your dream. I was just interested in how it actually came about, like how you met them and how...
Okay, I'm having a thought. My dream came about because I went into Manchester town centre, and you know, when this was the beginning of the birth, I suppose, of rock books, and I Need More had just come out, and I thought, you know what, I've always wanted to read a book about Johnny, so why don't I have a go? I mean, I knew that I could write, and I really loved reading and stuff, so I thought I would try, and I started to write the book. And what happened was I had some preliminary chapters which Alan Howes at Jungle Records showed to Johnny and Christopher, and they liked those chapters. So I guess in a way that Johnny was very much an outlaw at the time, and the original In Cold Blood is kind of an outlaw book too.
Yeah, and he used to hang out at Max's Kansas City and Truman Capote, right?
Yes,
So
and it is a
that's
play. It is a play on In Cold Blood, obviously, and the book, and Johnny's song In Cold Blood, which is why we called it that.
Yeah, beautiful. So within the sort of process, it kind of, so you come into it and it suddenly changes. It suddenly goes into you bringing yourself into the story.
Yeah.
And is that due to when you met, and is that kind of why did you choose to do it that way?
Well, because I thought Johnny embodied to me what I believed rock and roll was supposed to be, which was really exciting, really dangerous. I mean, nobody got rock and roll down in a live setting like Johnny. I mean, he was amazing on stage.
Mm.
And you don't necessarily always sort of capture that from the footage, but it was like watching kind of lightning, or how I'd imagine, say, Eddie Cochran would be. It was incredibly exciting, although, you know, and people are talking about how Johnny played guitar. I've never actually heard anybody put that much excitement into it. And he was as great a player in his own way as, say, Hendrix. You know, the way Hendrix is so unique, he puts his whole soul into it. You got the same thing with Johnny. He was absolutely riveting.
Mm. But the mythology just completely overshadows it, of the personality, and that whole, you know, his whole rock and roll enigma just kind of overshadows his abilities sometimes, because he becomes this kind of pint of drugs, right? So he, you know, he gets accused of that, and that's kind of part of the attraction in some ways. Or do you think that is, where did he get his influences from, do you think?
Well, it was interesting because had Johnny to some degree been whatever he's been accused of being, I would have run a mile, but actually he was a very gentle man. He could be a very kind man. He knew I was a struggling single mum. So I think that hit a different chord had I, say, been a professional male journalist in a way. So I sort of got brought into the family circle, as it were, and it was a bit like going to school for me.
And it was quite, so the females that are represented through the film, for sure, it is a lot gentler than you see with the sort of the British press attack on kind of Nancy and that whole kind of what women are around bands. So there's a lot more with Gail, the tour manager, and
Oh yeah,
kind
Gail
of that
was
side of it.
wonderful.
Yeah.
All the women in there are very strong.
But yeah, I mean, like, you know, a lot of people like Viv Albertine, she'd say that women just get a really bad rep through punk, but this offers a different portrayal of it in a lot of ways with what you.
Well, I didn't find that in Johnny Thunders Land, and you know, obviously all the lovely, wonderful women in there were treated in the same way as I was and allowed to creatively blossom. I mean, Marcia Resnick, she's a phenomenal photographer, and she's lecturing in New York, and there's all her photo books are out.
And then so his lyrical abilities.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, there was an argument about that, wasn't there?
Yes. Well, you see, it's interesting. I have great respect for Richard Hell, and he has written some very eloquent things about Johnny since he's passed away. But many years ago, I was sent by Record Collector to interview Richard when I think Go Now had just come out. I can't remember what year it was.
It'll say in the back, because there's a fantastic discography in the back of this as well.
Oh, okay.
Tell us what year it was.
Anyway, so we were in the Hilton. He was staying at the Hilton, which is very street, I have to say. And he kind of wanted to know why I thought Johnny's lyrics were good, and at one point he threatened to sort of dangle me out of the window at the Hilton for supporting Johnny's lyricism. And I say, but his lyrics are very pure, they're very pure in an Eddie Cochran kind of way. And he got really annoyed about this.
Why? Because he was jealous, or like?
Maybe that was the case at the time, yes.
Yeah. Because I didn't realise that, you know, I'm younger than punk, but
Well, that's why it's interesting hearing your perspective and how you view it.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's just been sold to us as a sort of, you know, the rise of the working class, as you were just saying, and kind of heroin being, you know, there hadn't been any heroin until punk in a lot of ways, you know, that's how it gets sold.
Oh, it's just.
Down,
I think we are often sold a kind of reinvented history. I mean, I have heard this thing that there was no punk in London until heroin, but I meant to say it the other way around. But of course, the heroin use in London, in the UK, was endemic before punk. You could go to shops on the King's Road and buy heroin. It's just this weird new edition of history
and
that doesn't exist.
Do you think where does that come from? Does it?
I think it misinformed people that perhaps weren't around at the time. And an idea starts, and then people add kudos to this imaginary idea. It's ridiculous to say there wasn't heroin in London until the Heartbreakers came over. Of course there was.
But the myth did exacerbate it, as all great poets have that romanticism, right? There's always that going on.
Oh, sometimes, I don't know if it's romanticism, there's also a touch of scapegoating. You know, people were envious of Johnny, were envious of the Heartbreakers as well. And yes, they, unfortunately, it's such a huge subject, maybe we should move away from it. But on the other hand, as anybody that's watched that film, there was a deep hurt inside of Johnny, and in one way that made him charismatic, saying the same way that Edith Piaf was deeply charismatic.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a gentleness in all his songs, right? There's a love. There's you know, he can do a love song unlike anyone else.
And there was a gentleness in him.
Yeah. So that gentleness and, you know, kind of fallibility always go quite hand in hand, don't they? So yeah.
I really want to know if I can vape in here. Is vaping allowed in buildings?
I see people doing it on the ginger line, so I'm sure you can get away with it. No, was going to tell.
It's vanilla custard. Oh gosh, that might be advertising. Please carry on.
So Danny, the filmmaker, how did you come? How did he approach you about it?
Yes, I think he did.
Yeah, because it's full of your work, the film as well, isn't it? Because there's there's a lot of deep research in the book, and there's a lot of referencing of sort of texts that are around it.
Oh, I know how he got his first copy of In Cold Blood in 1987. Like many people, he shoplifted a copy. So. It's been one of the most shoplifted and stolen books of all time.
Excellent. Excellent. Your New York Dolls book that follows this as well.
Yeah.
That was one of the bestsellers too, right?
Oh, for a rock book, yeah.
Yeah.
In rock booky terms, it is a bestseller.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's brilliant. So you're writing now. You've just finished your first novel, right?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I was going to say, does anybody want to ask anything else about Johnny? Are there anything else? Yes.
What was?
Yeah, I was interested in the film when there was like one reference to was it his wife that he had the kids with, and someone said,
Julie.
yeah, somebody was saying she was a piece of work, and then it was just sort of mentioned almost as a
That's what I
secondary
mean, like a
thing.
Nancy thing, right? It's just that.
No,
like,
hang on, that he'd beaten her up. That was just like an aside, and I was actually quite interested in and quite horrified by that sort of dismissive attitude towards her, even though he was beating her up. So I thought,
Well,
I'd like to know a little bit more about
I don't think
her.
Bob Bruin was dismissive in the way that he explains it.
No, I don't think he was, but it's just the fact there was so little time given to that.
It's very difficult to get an entire person's life in a documentary.
Yeah. Still, I think it's fairly important when there's a major relationship.
Is it not part of the whole drugs thing quite a lot of the time that it just goes a bit crazy?
I would say there's zillions of relationships where they're on drugs, where domestic violence is an issue.
But I mean, his dad was around and about, or kind of with a lot of women. Do you think he ended up imitating that in a way with?
Well, Johnny's dad cut out when Johnny was a child, so he wouldn't have known. He wouldn't have known how his father was as a father.
Yeah.
I mean, I met Johnny's mum and his sister, but let's get back to some music questions.
Yeah. So, what about Bowie? And I mean, like, we were talking about this, and the dolls. Basically, I had no idea how like big the dolls were really, kind of until seeing that film. But the dolls and the influence that they had on Bowie. Would you like to talk about that at all?
I just think I think again we've gotten so soundbitey with pop history, and what I was saying to Kirsty was that interestingly Bowie transitioned from his hunky-dory phase into his Aladdin Sane phase when there were two distinct periods. One, he went to see Pork at the Roundhouse, which interestingly was stage managed by Lee Blackchilders. And then he goes to New York and he sees the dolls first time around. This really interesting thing where he was wearing like kind of hippie shoes, but he asks Sylvain, where'd you get your shoes made from? And he starts walking around in his high-heeled slingbacks after that. But I think Angie slept with Billy Mercier, and David had a little affair with Serinda Fox, who's in the Genie video. And then he comes back to London. He's got a much tougher, sort of more make-up-y look, and he's got Mick Ronson playing more kind of aggressive guitar. So that's what I would say were the Dolls' influence. And there's some fantastic snapshots of an absolutely transfixed Bowie watching the Dolls at Max's.
So, I mean, do you think he ripped them off?
No, I don't think that. But again, I'm just a little bit wary of sort of modern history that says this person created all of this. Well, everybody, as it shows in that, Johnny would have said who his influences were. You have to just dig a little deeper to see the spectrum of things.
And who do you think Johnny's influences were then?
Well,
Where did
yeah,
he go
Keith
back to?
Richards,
Yeah.
and in the Rolling Stones film, Gimme Shelter, there's a gorgeous close-up of Johnny in the audience. And Eddie Cochran, 50s rock and roll girl groups. That wonderful Ronnie Spector hair that he had, and he just backgammoned it up some more.
Yeah, I mean the look, basically, the look of all of it is just amazing, right? And
Yeah, but Johnny was one of those people that could make a pair of pajamas look like something else, you know? He was amazing.
lovely. And look, I'm watching that as well. I was interested on the impact of McLaren on the Red stuff, and whether or not you think that sort of popped punk in a lot of ways, and
How do you
what just kind of manufactured it, and what influence did McLaren have? Did he?
Oh no,
trash
but
it? Did he
it was
crash
the
them?
Dolls that had the influence on McLaren.
Oh,
They
that's
were
interesting.
that's and he's admitted that himself. That's what got him interested in rock and roll. He became a self-professed Dolls groupie.
But he put them all in red, did the commie stuff behind them, and like.
Yeah, he came in at the end of the road rescue package, and I have to say that the vinyl that he used is like industrial strength. I'm surprised that they could even walk wearing it. It's just like,
Well, it doesn't look that comfortable.
yeah, it was not comfy.
Yeah. And so, what was it like though, actually physically hanging out with them?
With Johnny, with Jerry, with Christopher, with Lee, and all the other people that I met, with Suzanne, who's Johnny's girlfriend. I mean, it was I was treated very generously and kindly and encouraged, and you know, I had very little money, very little wherewithal, so it was a very, as I said, it was encouraging. And I've not although I've met some wonderful people on the way, I haven't been treated with that sort of generosity, but I think that Johnny was a very real person. He was not protected by any sort of corporate companies. He was slugging it out like the rest of us.
I mean, that's what's amazing as well. You just realise how skint he was, right? And like, he was trying to get that deal, and it was all about getting a deal with the Heartbreakers, but they physically couldn't get one. They must have been so skint.
But also
When they were
at the end of Johnny's life, what's heartbreaking is he had some beautiful, beautiful songs, and he could not get a major deal.
Yeah, which is appalling.
Of course it's appalling, but that's how it is, kids.
Yeah.
Don't be real. Whatever you do not be real. Play the game.
What, a move back of that? Or, you know, but like, I mean.
I'm saying
like,
Johnny, and the majority of people that I met then were too real for their own good.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and then, I mean, how many of them are still around as well? I mean,
That's
from
a
that.
scary question. And
Yeah.
a very sad question.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you stay in touch with people from
Do it.
there?
The remaining people
Yeah.
that I hold very dear, because we all went through something together.
Yeah.
And also people that you respect and love, you have to fly the flag for them, which is why we're here today.
Yeah, totally right.
Does anybody else have any burning questions? Okay.
Back to my rubbish ones
Smouldering
then.
or your questions are fabulous.
Does anyone, like, what did we all think of the film? Like,
I thought it was interesting, but it's a bit of a hagiography as well. It wasn't, I felt you didn't really learn anything terribly new.
Well, it's not a hagiography. I mean, I think it is an honest film. What would you like to have learnt that was new?
About his relationships, much more in depth, about the fact that he was so alone when he died. I mean, that's quite interesting in itself.
That he was what?
So alone when he died?
People were meant to be going to join him. I mean, he didn't expect to die. He didn't know how ill he was. So Jerry Nolan was supposed to be going to join him. Stevie was supposed to be flying out to join him.
Yeah, I guess what I was thinking of was the fact that he was maybe robbed and things, and you know, that's kind of a real sense of really being alone, isn't it?
Well, if you've got a copy of the updated Ink or Blood, that does look at that, and it is incredibly tragic. But he was expecting to be joined by his friends, as it concludes in that book. Johnny was incredibly ill. The people that were around him should have called for medics. So the horrible, awful feeling is that as Johnny was dying, his room was probably ransacked. Yes.
That's part of the culture as well, right?
It is. I mean, it's very. That's my whole point. It's very interesting that it wasn't really delved in the film. I guess that's that it's kind of again kind of just not gone to any great depth. I guess.
But isn't that just, it is just what happens? So, I mean, it's just that, like, that's just what happens, isn't it, when it gets to that?
Exactly, that is what happens. That's a kind of interesting thing, isn't it? You can kind of question what happens and question how it's presented.
Well, I think that would have to be one for Danny, because I didn't make the film. I think Danny did what
No,
he
not
had
having
to
a go
do.
at you.
No, I know that, but it's just how much do you fit into a film? I mean, I find the end of that film distressing for personal reasons. But I understand why you're saying, and I would probably say, why was he alone? Well, it was for those reasons that Jerry and Stevie were supposed to join him. But part of me has often wondered too, was that if Johnny kind of went off by himself because he might have felt that he was dying, the way a cat kind of
That would be
crawls
really
away.
interesting. That would have been really interesting to see all those questions. Absolutely. I guess that's my point. Yeah.
But doesn't that play into it more as well, though? The whole thing of it, why does that happen? It's
But do you mean in
into the drugs myth, really, of it just being, another rock and roll death.
Well, I think with the New Orleans police, and I was in touch with Johnny's sister, they gosh, New Orleans, how many awful drug deaths are there going to be on one weekend? They don't give a damn, clearly. And then all of a sudden, okay, well, this person that died in the St. Peter's guest house, people do care about him. They want to know what happened. But of course, they'd dealt with it in the New Orleans way, and Johnny's sister often see it on Facebook, why I would have done this, I would have done that. She did everything that she could do. They got in private detectives, they wept so many tears, but you're up against the New Orleans Police Department.
And it also seems like the lymphoma and stuff as well.
That's what killed him.
Yeah, I mean, in the same way that his heart killed him, really, in the same way that his romance kind of might have led from one relationship to another and kind of got him into those sort of frustrated situations of being an artist and trying to get your stuff out there.
He just kept going as best.
I mean, he did. He did. He kept on trucking through it and kept on like ultimate, and his music got better, in my opinion, through his life's works as well. I find it like a lot of his later stuff way more soulful.
I think he was developing, and he had a lot more to give, but his body gave out, and he was he was pretty broken-hearted from the get-go.
Yeah.
His dad left him. He was abandoned. He carried that abandonment with him. But that's one of the reasons why I think there was that vulnerability, and there was that warmth there too that you don't often find.
Yeah, and that maybe doesn't get seen enough through it.
I mean, it's so funny, I remember saving up as a kid and going into Vivienne Westwood's shop on the King's Road, and the legends, Westwood is fantastic, but if you actually did go in there as a broke 16-year-old, it was the snootiest, snobbiest place full of designer clothes for a little clique, run by rich people. Perhaps I shouldn't have said that. That goes against the myth that it was for the kids. Actually, it wasn't really.
Yeah.
Would you say that with great artistry, there's always tragedy, that's always happened through the the ages, whether it's Van Gogh or musicians or anyone, there's always a price you pay, isn't there?
Well, I think Van Gogh is a very interesting point because he was deep, he was troubled, and he brought that out in his wonderful art, and we revere his art now, just like we revere Johnny's music. I think literature, art, music, when it really touches a chord, it's not coming from, usually from happy, satisfied people.
Yeah.
So very good point.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, you know, it was tragic what happened to him, but that was the price that had to be paid for what he's given us.
I wish that wasn't true, but
yeah,
perhaps
but it is,
that's
maybe
right.
it is, maybe that's what had to happen for these great works to be given to us and given to us for the rest of humanity. That's the price that unfortunately has to be paid by these people, and if it wasn't, we would never have them. They would just wouldn't exist. And
Well,
to pick up
yeah.
on the point about Vivian Westwood shop, yeah, you're right, I went in there as a 16-year-old, yeah, and it was full of pretentious, snotty twats, but that's Vivian Westwood.
Right, no, I have to say, I love what she does. I think she's amazing, but the history says it was a place for the kids.
No, it never
No, it
was.
wasn't. At least I could have gone up the road to Boy and you know, maybe got a brooch or some funny sunglasses.
Yeah, no, for us it was always Kent Market.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
I love Kensington.
Beaufort Market.
Anyway,
Anyway.
we went off on a tangent
No,
there.
there wasn't much. No, that was brilliant. Just that, like the artistic sacrifice, right?
Yeah, it's just without it, because we've got all these people that have given us these great volumes of work. Well, none of us would be here without it. You know, from Bowie to Thunders, all the way through, and they've all had tragic lives. You know, Bowie was touched by madness. His brother Terry,
That's right.
his souls. Without that, and without the touch of genius that these people would have had, we wouldn't have it. And without it, we just have to look at the pop scene today. We'll be stuck with Take That and all this sort of shit. That's just, you know.
But I mean, I think voices come through, but you explained how you felt very eloquently. I think Van Gogh is a great case in point.
Do you think it's possible for there to be? Do you think it would be possible for there to be another Johnny Thunders? Do you think it could happen?
Well, nobody can be duplicated.
Yeah,
you
but
know.
another. I mean, because you've written about Pete Doherty, right? Or you've edited for him, and I mean, he was clearly affected by reading Cold Blood, right? So,
And his curiosity about Johnny was very endearing, which is in part why I ended up editing his diaries, Peter's diaries. But they're very different artists from different places in time.
So yeah, I just think that being, that it's just that the way that things get represented in the culture that we receive them in is, you know, punk being this commodity of sorts, which is kind of how it's, you know,
Well,
it
it's,
just
I
gets
guess
labelled
it's
up as a
now
product,
it's
doesn't
commodity,
it?
isn't
Yeah.
it? Because it's how things are sold via media. I mean, really, Johnny was kind of, and the Heartbreakers, everything was kind of classic rock and roll. And by which I mean sort of Eddie Cochran, Gene Vincent.
And you're making, or a film is being made.
Oh
of your
yes,
book.
well yes, a biopic or a biopic because they miss that squiggly bit in the middle now. So it's a biopic.
Excellent.
I
And
hope so. There's a lovely American production company, but it's a bit like finding who's going to play Johnny is a bit like the Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind role, you know. Anybody else want to ask anything? Is there anything that's you feel has been missed or overlooked?
well, I'd recommend the book. I'd recommend reading the Johnny Thunders.
Oh, here, pass it over to me and I'll be cheesy. There we go. Product placement.
So yeah, punk will never die, eh?
Well, rock and roll. will
Yeah,
never
rock and
die.
roll will never die.
And your shoes are phenomenal. I really like.